podcast. I'm your host, Nick Jikomis, and today my guest is Alexandros Marinos. Alex has a PhD in computer science, and he is the founder and CEO of Balena, a technology startup related to the world of edge computing and the so-called Internet of Things. I guess you could say that we spent most of the conversation discussing how complex systems are organized. Alex talked about how he thinks about the organizational structure of his own company and how organizational structures impact group dynamics, growth, conflicts of interest, and the ability to innovate. We talked about how systems thinking can be used to understand the behavior of different kinds of organizations with different internal structures. And one interesting area Alex provided commentary and analysis on towards the end is how to make sense of the behavior of large institutional organizations. For example, something like the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, which has been very important in influencing how the global COVID-19 pandemic has played out, at least here in the US. If you're interested in complex systems like human organizations, how the internal structures of different organizations influence what they do and how they behave, and why human organizations can sometimes behave in deranged ways, this episode will be of interest to you. As always, if you enjoy the content that I'm providing, please like, share, and subscribe. A big way that you can help support the podcast is to simply tell your friends or your family about it if you think they'll be interested in it. You can also give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and you can sign up for my free Minded Matter newsletter on Substack. All of this will be linked to in the episode description. This episode is supported in part by Athletic Greens. Their main product, AG1, is a comprehensive and convenient daily nutrition product containing 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food-sourced ingredients with less than 1 gram of sugar per serving, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything. It's gluten and dairy-free and compatible with paleo, vegan, vegetarian, and ketogenic diets. AG1 is a quick and convenient way to supplement your diet to help ensure your body is getting the nutrients it needs. It comes in powder form, and you can mix it in water and drink it, or you can put it into a smoothie or a shake or something like that. I mix it into water and drink it with the first meal of each day, and it's super convenient. If you go to athleticgreens.com/mindandmatter, Athletic Greens will give you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Their vitamin D product comes in tincture form, so you just take 1 drop each day. A large fraction of the population is actually vitamin D deficient, especially in winter months when we get less sun exposure, and vitamin D is super important for the proper function of the immune system and for a variety of other things. And there's even evidence indicating that vitamin D deficiency is correlated with more severe cases of COVID-19 in those who get infected. Every time I go into the doctor each year for a checkup, I'm always told that vitamin D deficiency is very common and I should be supplementing on a daily basis. So visit athleticgreens.com/mindandmatter or click the link in the episode description. You'll get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D with your first purchase. Today's show is brought to you in part by Dosist, an all-natural cannabis company specializing in dose-controlled cannabis products made with plant-based ingredients. To learn more about Dosist, their products, and where they are available, please visit their website through the link in the episode description. And with that, here's my conversation with Alexandros Marinos. Alexandros Marinos, how are you?
Hi, how's it going?
Good. It's good to see you. We've talked briefly once before. We're both based out of Seattle. Can you start off by just telling everyone what your background is?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and founder of Balena, which does edge computing. I've been running this company for about almost getting close to a decade now. We're sort of trying to do what Amazon did for cloud computing for devices that are out in the world but are not necessarily your mobile phone. And I guess of late, I've been using some of the reasoning tools we've been developing inside Balena to understand this very fractured space of edge computing to something that's kind of come in and affected us and affected supply chains for us as well, which is the pandemic. So I guess that's how we came in contact.
So we're going to do a lot of discussion, I think, about how you think about organizational structure and how your company is structured, maybe not so much about the actual technology and what you guys do per se. But can you give people some kind of anchor there? So what is edge computing and what kind of products or services do you guys actually provide your clients?
Yeah. So basically, if you look around you, there's more and more computers, and not all of them are your phone or your laptop or something that has a user on them all the time, right? They are appliances. They are anything from a drone to a self-driving car to a thermostat to some building monitoring solution. Smart cameras, all sorts of things that we put in our houses, but also in industry, in commercial settings. We're just deploying all this technology, and we don't have very good tools on how to make that easy to do for one, and for another to keep them up to date and do all the things that we do for laptops and phones and cloud computing. So that's what Balena does. We have a lot of customers that have from 100 to tens of thousands of devices. And they need to manage them as a fleet, right? Not just like as one device, but like as a swarm. Mm-hmm. And we just make all of the infrastructure, all the plumbing. We do all the unsexy work to make our customers able to sort of do the thing that they specifically want to do on top of that technology.
I see. So you guys are a startup that writes software that help people manage fleets of machines.
Yep.
Interesting. So in your Twitter bio, it says systems thinking is the way to a positive sum civilization. So I would like you to unpack that for us. What is systems thinking in contrast to other types of thinking? And what does it mean when you say positive sum civilization?
Yeah. So I can explain systems thinking. The best way I have to explain system thinking off the top of my head is Tesla. It's a company I've been investigating a lot, and you can see the sort of the conflict of points of view in the conversation around Tesla, right? So there's some people that really get it, and some people that really don't get it. More so a few years back before the numbers had come in fully. So what's the interesting thing about Tesla is that if you model it on a spreadsheet, right, you're like, okay, well, what are the revenues and how fast are they growing, and what's the market share? You come up with one set of conclusions. But if you look at something else, which is like all the feedback loops that are built into that company, you come up with a different set of conclusions. For instance, they gather data on their motors, right, that they have on their cars about all sorts of like deep physics performance, because they're the first sort of electric motor that's been deployed at the scale. They gather that data, they feed it into algorithms. Those algorithms optimize the operation of those motors, which they put back down into their devices, into their cars, which are devices. They qualify for Balena. And then that improves the performance of the vehicle. Now, improving how well a motor can use energy means you need fewer batteries to go the same distance. Having fewer batteries means you have less weight, which means you have even fewer batteries, right? So there's all of these reinforcing feedback loops. And then the better you make your car, the cheaper you make your car, the more cars you sell, the more data you have, the better training you do to your motors, and you feed that loop back in there again. And so I've got a thread somewhere where I've like listed out 10 or 15 of these feedback loops that are feeding into each other, right? Now, if you put that on a spreadsheet, again, anything that is cumulative will look pretty weak in the early phase, right? If you have a nice linear growth, you're like, wow, that looks amazing. If you look at something that goes like this, in the early phases, you could confuse yourself for thinking it's going nowhere while it's building up all this internal strength. That product did not sort of appear out of nowhere. It had to be built first for it to deliver its value. So it's really about system thinking is really thinking about things and their interaction with each other, and thinking really about the composition and the interactions of things rather than just taking a numerical target, seeing how you hit it. That could help, right? Thermostat is essentially a feedback loop that looks at temperature and what the desired temperature is and adjusts to hit that continuously. But when you go down that linear path of modeling things and saying like, okay, well, it's sold this much, how much next year, and you like, okay, well, now 10 years in the future, it's like, whoa, it's bad paradigms basically. So again, I think of systems as these sort of holistic things, and I know when I think of that word, kind of leads you somewhere else. But I think of when you make something, you think of it as a system. It means you can build a lot of strength in it and a lot of resilience as well. So by resilience, I mean something like anti-fragility. Actually, is a better word, where it responds to challenge by getting better. right? That's kind of what you want. You want something that won't crumble under pressure, but it will actually respond creatively and become even better. So that's kind of a systems thinking way of building a company, which sort of applies decently well to how Balena has been getting run as well. Now, let's talk about positive sum, right? So these are the games that we play, right? So when you build a company, you design it top down. Like there's one designer, of course, with large organizations that gets watered down. But when people cooperate, that there's no sort of higher authority to tell them, what to do. So game theory sort of comes to play. And sort of in terms of interactions with people, you can have zero-sum games, like, there's a pie, how much everybody gets out of the pie, right? A lot of that thinking. But because when there is zero-sum thinking, people tend to get into a very competitive mindset. You also get negative sum games, right? Which are games that, you're like, well, if I destroy half the pie, I get to get 3/4 of what's left, and you get only 1/4, right? And that's better for me. It's worse for everybody else, right? Because if there's like four people in the game, I get to like get 2 of them out of the game, destroy half the pie, get 3/4 of the pie rather than 3/8, let's say, of the pie that's left. And somebody else gets 1/4. So I'm better off at the expense of everybody else, right? That's kind of a zero-sum game. Negative sum game. But zero-sum games tend to become negative just because of the tension. Whereas positive sum games is the opposite. It's like where our collaboration makes both of us richer, makes both of us better off.
I see. So zero sum is when I win, you lose. So for every winner, there's a loser. Negative sum is everyone loses. It's just a matter of who loses the least or the most, but we all lose something. And positive sum is the opposite, where at the end of the game, everyone has come out ahead who's playing it.
That's even better. Is it even better kind of positive sum game? It's omni win-win. Strictly speaking, for positive sum, it just has to be more a value at the end than the beginning. Mm-hmm. But it tends to correlate very well with omni win-win, which is like everybody who participates wins.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were describing things like systems and what systems thinking is, it seems to me that important things to think about here, to use your Tesla example, are sensors and negative feedback loops. So when you were describing the Tesla example, what you're really saying is they have, in this case, internal sensors that are detecting and measuring something about the insides of this product. And of course, there are external sensors as well. The company has to sense what's going out in the market through various mechanisms. And there are different kinds of feedback loops that one can build that are connected to these sensors that allow you to do things, to say it abstractly. So when you're thinking about systems in this way, feedback loops, sensors, and when you're thinking about constructing an organization that is going to result in a positive sum dynamics, how do you actually do that when you're constructing a company and sort of designing how people are going to interact with each other?
Yeah, great question. So this is actually at the bottom of how Balena is constructed. So is designed, at least the principle that we started with, we've been iterating on that. But I think the real inspiration came from my wife. So she was working full time as a journalist, and she was like at a pretty traditional media company. And one thing that was really interesting to me from the story she was telling me is that she was on the beat, right? She was talking to the people with the stories, but it was a trade publication, which is important because the people you're writing the stories about are the people that are reading your stories, right? You're talking to your audience basically and picking out, which companies have good stories, etc. And so she had a very good sense of the company and the market and the product and how it needed to be. So she was saying, we need to do this, we need to do that, right? Because when you talk, you're like, oh yeah, I like this, I didn't like that. But you get a sense. And weirdly enough, that was not getting to the hires, right? So she was like on her own coding some stuff and doing visualizations with data for her stories, but like nobody else was paying any attention. And it just baffled me that you have this massive company, right, where the frontline people, the people who actually have access to the outside world, there was no process by which, the sensors, like you say, right, they have no way of actually being heard systemically or organizationally from the top. It might happen that, she might tell her manager and the manager might tell the manager and like whatever, but that's like almost an accident, right? Because you have a chain of where anyone like cutting the signal means that the signal doesn't get to the top. You have like 5 people and they all have to agree for something to go to the top. Usually it gets beautified, right? Usually everybody adds their own layer of polish, and in the end, there's nothing to do. What goes up top has nothing to do with what actually started at the bottom. Even the fact that we think of the tree, right, and we talk about the bottom, the people who have all of the actual like real world experience is really problematic, and that's basically baked into how companies are structured. There's no way around that problem. If you stay with a hierarchy, you just add abstractions and abstractions and abstractions until the management basically has no idea what's happening at the front line. And there's countermeasures. The Japanese have like this kind of management by walking around concept, which is like actually get to the front lines. But these are countermeasures to the systemic issue. Okay, so seeing that, I basically was like, yeah, well, that's completely stupid, and we shouldn't do that. So we did a few things actually. So one of the things that we did is we structured the information flow of the company before we structured the people, right? So instead of saying like we're going to have a people like a tree of people, it's going to look roughly like the Prussian army looked like in the 19th century, because that's exactly what we're doing, right? The creative, work in the 21st is just about building an army unit in the 19th. So we said first, like, how does information flow, right? So we have what we call the surface, which is sort of what our customers see, like everything that we put out there, everything that we need to support, everything that we're responsible for. And from that, we get signals, right? We get all these sensors, like you described. It could be support, it could be from a sales conversation, it could be from social media, it could be from our machines, our servers themselves, like complaining about something going wrong. And even better when you get the same signal from multiple places. Right, that's kind of now you're starting to get, not only you can see something, you can smell it, right? You can hear it as well. Like that's definitely real if you're getting it from multiple sites. And that's where we get patterns, right? Like something is happening, which is like robust. And that's what drives our brainstorming process. So we think of what we call improvements, which we then sort of implement in a somewhat much more standard sort of continuous integration, continuous deployment, agile kind of way, which is the other side of them, right? It's the actuator, right? It's you can have a sensor and you can have like the reasoning, but you have to also be able to affect reality, right? So that's kind of your implementation deployment arm. And when we're done, we basically change the surface. We're back where we started. Which means a couple of things actually. It means we can actually then walk backwards and go where the original signal started and say, hey, remember this thing you told us about 2 months ago? We fixed it. Do you want to see if it works for you? It's there, right? This just blows people's mind when we do that. Like it's the sort of thing you just can't do unless you've built things exactly this way. The other thing is that we can iterate, right? Now we've learned, we've made a step so we can see what the next step of feedback is. And that doesn't mean necessarily that we are always acting as a greedy algorithm, just like doing one step at a time based on what our customers tell us. We can always inject a vision. We can always just have an idea based on like a lot of input over the depth of time. Just something clicks. What it means though is that when you actually deliver that, it's still subject to the same feedback that will make sense also for our customers, because you're not going to nail it the first time, right? Steve Jobs did not nail the iPhone. They've got copy paste. They didn't have an app store. Right, you learn these things on the fly. So by starting with that information flow, then we build like a human sort of hierarchy on top of that, which is very, very likely, because actually it turns out when you have a lot of information structure, you need less hierarchy, which is counterintuitive, but it's Bitcoin is kind of the extreme, like a ton of information structure, no hierarchy, or almost no hierarchy, right? So we're not that far away in that continuum, but we're in that direction.
So you said something, I want to try and reiterate some of that to help people wrap their heads around it. So you said something interesting a moment ago. You were talking about how if you've got multiple different kinds of sensors that are collecting information through different modalities, that this can help you identify real patterns more robustly. And so my background's in neuroscience, that immediately just reminded me of something that most neuroscientists are very well aware of, which is the idea of multimodal integration. So one of the key things that our brains do to help us figure out what's actually going on outside of our bodies, and then to build some kind of adaptive response to it in our behavior, is multimodal integration, right? So I have information that comes into my eyeballs, I have information that comes into my ears, I have information that comes in through my fingertips, right? I can touch, I can smell, I can taste, et cetera, et cetera. And when all of these things are in agreement, that tells you, okay, there's very clearly something out there. When all those senses, are congruent. If there's a mismatch, right? If I see something out of the corner of my eye, but I turn and it's not there, and I didn't hear anything, and I don't smell anything, and so forth, it tells you that signal is wrong. So in what sense are you building sort of these multimodal sensors into your organization? It sounded like maybe you have ways of doing this with respect to things like customer service.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly the model. And really, it's kind of fascinating because I've spent a lot of time working around ideas on Goodhart's law, which is like when you get a metric and then you try to make it a target, it stops being a good metric. So that's kind of the traditional way organizations work, like with commissions or whatever. That's how they try to steer their teams and direction. But these things are fragile, right? So I've been always asking myself this question of how does an organization solve difficult sense-making questions in such a polluted environment? And what I came up with is exactly what you say. This concept exists in neuroscience. It exists in astronomy. There's multi-messenger astronomy, right? If you see it in the gravity waves, and you see it in light, and you see it in the there's like the four fundamental powers, basically forces are telling you the same thing. It's a real thing, but it's in so many places. It's there's triangulation in social science. There is. I'm forgetting now. I had found so many examples. I was like, okay, or hedge funds, right? They use what they call alternative data, right? Like, which is like drones flying over parking lots or like whatever. And they combine that with other data, right? So again, you get this exactly the same pattern. It's like, okay, this isn't by chance, right? This is something that is a deep pattern that exists has been discovered over and over again from nature to various fields in the real world. So that's exactly the pattern we're trying to copy, to be inspired from, and yeah. So basically, every interaction we have with the outside world is interaction itself. Like we try to help a customer, let's say, with a support problem, but we also do what we call teardown afterwards, which is like we try to find what this is an instance of, right? What if somebody says like, how do I secure my application, right? This is customer is confused about security, right? That could happen on Twitter too. That could happen in our forums. That could happen in whatever. Or they could say like your build pipeline, whatever. It doesn't really matter what that is slow, right? We could see that from our server logs. We could hear it from support. Some big customer could call up, their customer success person to discuss this. Like it could be popping up all over the place, and the more it pops up, the more we know we should pay attention. But it's the same pattern.
I see. So one of the things that's interesting, so we've sort of been starting to discuss how you've organized your company, and I want to talk more about that. But there's also just like a very basic and pervasive thing that you see seemingly across all companies, which is in the beginning when they are small. People will describe a startup as being agile or nimble. They can move quick. They can do things very quickly and creatively. And as companies grow, in almost all cases, they basically get slower and they get worse at decision making, at least in some ways. Yep. So what exactly? So A, do you think that's true? And B, what is the reason for that in terms of organization? And what does it have to do with things like Dunbar's number that I know you've talked about?
So I think it is true. I don't think it's inevitable, or at least I hope it's not inevitable. And the point is, as companies grow, when a team is small, they do what we describe organic, right? You just hear a bunch of things. Like there's 5 people, like, it's a startup in the garage, right? Like that's, you see things, you connect things that you wouldn't have connected. It's not your department, but there is no department. So who cares if it's not your department? You just saw a thing. You might stop somebody to talk about it. You may get an idea. That's how it works, right? But as you grow, and this is, I think, where the problem is, we nobody can know everybody anymore, right? In the company, that's the 150 people Dunbar's number, which is like the theoretical, the hypothesized sort of limit for the early human tribes. Like that was about as big as we hypothesized they could get, because that's about how well our brain does in tracking, distinct people and their mental states. So once you get beyond that, you start to lose track now. Like there's people who come and go into the company you never really talk to. There's things happening, you do a thing, and then you go halfway through and somebody says, no, that other person's working on that, don't work on this. There's like information transfer issues, there's coordination issues, and then it starts to feel more like politics, because now you're actually starting to negotiate internally rather than actually trying to build a thing. And the organizational structures we have are basically our attempts to resolve this issue. I don't think we're doing very well, which is counterintuitive. I think a lot of people will say, like we have quite advanced sort of management, we've got all the MBAs and all that stuff. But where's the control game? How do we know this is working if we don't know what else there is? It very well could be that our best companies are working in spite of the structure, not because of it. So that definitely is a thing. And I think Dunbar's number comes into it. And I think the escape from that is to take this core dynamic that occurs naturally with small groups and build infrastructure build tooling basically for the team to be able to continue to operate in that mode as the team grows without needing to track everybody, like to institutionalize that loop, before it kind of fades away.
I see. So let me see if I've got this. Basically what you're saying is small tribes, lower than Dunbar's number, which is just this sort of abstract number that's supposed to capture the idea that there's only so many people you can really know or be reasonably good acquaintances with, right? We all have memory limitations. I can't know more than 50 or 100 or 150 or 200 people, whatever it is. As soon as your organization gets bigger than that, you kind of get these silos, and it just fundamentally changes the architecture by which information flows from person to person. So what you're saying is that you hypothesize, at least, or maybe this is what you do inside your company, you can use tech to build communication tools such that when the group and the organization gets bigger than Dunbar's number, you can continue to behave like that small tribe in the startup anyway.
Yeah, I mean, something will get lost, right? To me, it's a great summary. We faced a dilemma at some point a couple of years ago, because I kind of saw that some things were going in the traditional direction, right? And I kind of said, well, look, I basically showed them a diagram, which is exactly what you described, right? The bigger, you can be nimble or you can be big, and it's kind of like a trade-off. And I was saying, why can't we use our size? I think we had just raised a round, we had money in the bank, and we had some optionality. Why can't we use our newfound funding to become faster rather than slower? Because I even think saying that we want to maintain the original, speed is defeatist. You're kind of saying like we're either going to like stay as we are or going to get worse. Like that's kind of what we are playing with. And I'm saying, why not get faster? And then I found out some fun factors. Like I still need to confirm this, but I choose to believe it was true. Henry Ford apparently, in the height of his power at Ford, had 10,000 tool makers inside Ford. Right, like these are not people who are making cars. These were people who were making tools for the people who are making cars. Right. So this investment in the meta, this investment in how we do things, not just accepting, Google's management playbook in a startup, which is like what everybody does and it makes no sense. But actually, just saying, why do we do what we do this way, and what is the right way to do it, and investing in improving that. Is again very counterintuitive. It hurts your metrics in the short term. You're not going to look good because that money is not going to sales or whatever. But in the long run, and this is maybe where the space we're in is helpful, because edge computing is so brutal. You either many or most of the companies really that have tried to do what we do have died, or if they're large companies, they step back. It's kind of very interesting because it requires a lot of integration and just a lot of patience to build the technology just right. So I think that has worked. That's where our DNA from what we are working on has helped us adopt this long-term mindset, and that has helped us sort of invest in the actual way that we work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some of what you're saying, so it sort of reminds me the way that I've met many people, I live in Seattle after all, who have worked at Amazon. And, a big thing you always hear about Amazon when people talk about why it became what it is that there's internally this very big emphasis on internal tooling. So sort of like your Henry Ford example, there's a lot of people building tools for the car maker, so to speak. And a lot of the, treating internal tools used by employees as if they are customer facing products, and sort of taking the same amount of diligence and care that you would take for the customer product for building these products. Is that something you're doing? So maybe just a question that leads into this is, how do you guys actually just informally communicate in the company? Are you using Slack and other tools, or are you building your own software for doing this in a new kind of way?
Yeah, so that's definitely, to be honest, internally now, Balena, in terms of your Amazon example, I've taken a very hard line position of, if you're not building a product, you're not building anything, right? Like, because there's so many people that say like, oh, I'm going to build a process and it's going to be this wiki and, just going to ask me. And I'm like, yeah, we've seen this 100 times. You build that thing and then it becomes this haunted mess that like, it's not, no, look over there, like this tribal knowledge is kind of diffuse and kind of sort of works, but will rot, right? So if you don't get it to the plateau of being an actual product, like with a front end, with documentation, with whatever it is that it takes to hit a steady state where it's not going to start, rotting. That's the level we got to hit. So that's definitely a thing that I have high conviction on, and Amazon is doing a good job of. Beyond that, sorry, what was the second part of the question? There was
well, to what extent are you guys building your own communication tools?
Right. So in order to do that, what was really interesting to me was that to build this way of working, right, where I said we structure information first. Initially, we were just integrating a bunch of tools, right? So we had something like Slack, something like Salesforce, something like Zendesk, something like whatever. And I had two big meetings at one point, one with the customer success sales side and one with the support side. And I said, okay, draw me out a diagram with all the that they're using and how they're integrated. I just want to understand, because my background is from information systems. So I was getting my spider sense was tingling that things were not amazing. So I saw this sort of spider's nest on both of those conversations, and knowing what I know from my background, I knew that this is only going to go one way. Right? We're going to add more stuff. It's going to get more complicated. It's going to get more integrated. It's going to keep breaking, and there's no the security implications of this whole thing were a nightmare. So as a result, I was like, okay, we definitely have to sort of do something here. We try to build our own sort of synchronization infrastructure to keep it minimal. That didn't work. We really try to avoid having to make our own thing. The longest time, at some point, I was like, okay, I'm just fighting the inevitable here. I might as well just give up and start building something. So we started building something that we call Jellyfish. We've actually recently open sourced it. Jellyfish is basically the idea that most of these products have some fundamental functionalities, right? They allow you to take your data items, sort them, filter them, collaborate over them, permission them, share them, interact with customers about them, et cetera, et cetera. But the data items are different, right? So Zendesk has like a support thread, Salesforce has like an opportunity, Slack has a chat, like whatever. But once you like take that out, what they do around that is roughly very, very similar. And they also don't like you to share data between them, right? Because that makes them irrelevant, right? So their business model is seats. And seats means you got to be in the product, right? Which I found very interestingly was enforcing in Balena a department structure without us actually wanting to have it, right? Because if you have the high priesthood of Salesforce, they're the people that have access to the data. If you have the high priesthood of Zendesk, they're the high priesthood that has that data. So now they talk on behalf of the data, right? Like you have an implicit department, even if you never, that was never your intent.
I've seen the same thing, and what we're describing is not. This is a very typical problem, right? You get this sort of explosion of different tools. You get, I like your term for it. You get a priesthood, which is the subset of people in the company that knows how to use the tool, and then very quickly you're in a situation where, okay, I'm working on some problem, building some product, but now I've got 5 different kinds of information that live inside 5 different tools. And I am incapable of just going and getting what I already know I need. I have to go and consult these different priestly castes of people, one of which knows the Salesforce database, the other one knows this tool, and it just becomes slow. It's like quicksand.
Yeah. So that was the thing. And I was like, okay, is there any hope in the horizon? Like, is kind of look forward to something. Maybe the situation is bad now, but it'll get better later. And I was like, no, we're just going to get worse and worse on this. So I kind of just pulled the plug or maybe plug the project in and said, okay, we're going to build Jellyfish. And the idea is, again, that it can accept all sorts of different kind of data items that we can define. It can synchronize with those products as well. It doesn't mean we're not using GitHub. It doesn't mean we're not using a tool that has some value. It means that we build a one-to-one synchronization with Jellyfish, and then Jellyfish is our internal sort of clearinghouse where we operate as much as possible. We might skip outside, but at least you've got a hub and spoke model, right? You got 10 programs, 10 connections to your center. You have 10 programs and you need to connect them to each other. That's 90 connections, right? That's a lot. That's a lot more complicated without a center. So Jellyfish is becoming quickly our communication sort of nervous center for Balena, and it I kind of call it a cross between Excel and Slack. So something like that.
And you said you open sourced it. What would be the motivation for doing that?
So for the longest time, we're keeping it to ourselves, and said, it could be a lot of potential, et cetera, et cetera. But that's where the positive something comes in. And we said, well, look, we're going to start talking about how we operate at Balena. We consider this to be a magnet, right? We started being vocal about how we work because we want to attract people that want to work this way. And the magnet has two poles, right? Like we also want to tell people who might not be very comfortable working that way that that you might not want to waste your time applying to Balena because if you're looking for a more traditional structure that works for you, that's great. We don't do that. So we wanted to sort of clarify our own position, and we wanted to transmit it to the world. And then we heard people with at least some level of interest. It's still very early days. And we said, well, okay, why are we, we kind of challenged our own assumption of why are we keeping Jellyfish closed source, right? And we said, well, there's some theoretical benefit if we make it one day, but we could just put it out there and maybe somebody else has value from that, and we could create this positive sum interaction, right? They make it better, we benefit, we make it better, they benefit, maybe other people can step in. And we all operate better. So that was kind of the very simple way in which we thought about it. We've done a lot of work. There's years and years of work have gone into it. It's still probably it's not the sort of thing today that you would just take and stand up and be on your way into 2 hours. It's not as easy to get started with like Slack, but that's kind of how you get started in these feedback loops, right? You put it out there, you hear complaints, you improve it. It'll get there eventually. But we just thought that this was a kind of a binary motion that we could perform that sort of sets all those things in motion, rather than saying, we'll perfect it internally and one day we'll release it or whatever. Just let's just open it up. It is effectively an alpha right now for people who are not us, right? Who are not running it internally. We don't have the team sort of to just stand it up. But there's only one way to get where we want, which is to allow people who have the desire to work with it. And I don't know, that felt a lot more. Like the right thing to do, I think, for that technology than holding on to some sort of vague hope of eventually building some big business on it. There still might be a business on it, but keeping the source closed is not that just didn't feel like the right way forward.
So when you're doing a lot of the stuff that's new and takes a lot of time to bake, how do you think about actually tracking success there? So you mentioned something earlier, I think called Goodhart's law, which is that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So help us unpack that. So I doubt you're saying that you guys don't use metrics,
Right.
but how do you actually think about something like this in terms of how you measure and motivate success for something that takes more than just a couple of sprints of work to actually get to a product?
Yeah, the way we think about metrics is the metrics are good when we're sitting on the same side of the table, right? If we're having database issues, let's say, right, we're gonna pull up the metrics and we're gonna sit there and just look at them and say, okay, what's wrong with the database? What Goodhart's law sort of forbids you from doing is using metrics as a weapon, especially against people who, it's upon them to do a good job in measurable and non-measurable ways. So if I go to my sales team and I say, like, you got to get the sales up, or else sort of your job is aligned, or you can use, commissions or whatever, which we don't. That gives them a very clear message, right? That of all the ways in which they do their work well, there's measurable ways and non-measurable ways, right? The measurable ways are what counts, right? So they should do as much as they can there, and the non-measurables don't count, right? So they should take energy from the one and apply it to the other. And what's worse, you might say, okay, not everybody's like that, right? Not everybody's motivated that way. Even if you put a commission system in place, people, some people will still do their job properly. You have set yourself up to fire those people by measuring that way, right? You literally will punish them for not doing that. So eventually you'll get to the point where you'll only have people that are following that philosophy. So that's the problem with sort of Goodhart's law, and that's why I think metrics used as an argument, as a no context way to make decisions about things are toxic to, and they directly lead to a lot of the ways in which sort of modern society is breaking down. There's this book called The Tyranny of Metrics that I wholeheartedly recommend to people. It has examples of this same pattern everywhere. From somebody reading, somebody going to university, say, right? Like if you've ever chosen a class because you thought it would be an easy A rather than because you'd learned the most, you've participated in Goodhart's law. You have now optimized the metric of your GPA over the non-measurable of, like, how much did I learn, right? So we do it all the time. We don't even think about it.
I see. No, yeah, that's a great example. I think probably everyone has done something like that, where the metric becomes the thing you want rather than the thing that you started out wanting to get. So you have this interesting parable, I guess, in this essay you have on Substack about something called the Anti-Corruption Agency, which I guess is about how incentives can drive good people to do bad things. And I think it's related to what you were just describing. So can you unpack that for us and explain that story?
Yeah. So that story, I was really happy when I wrote it because I think it really captures. It's like a thought experiment, right? That really puts you in a position where you kind of see how everything starts to go sideways. So the idea is, like, imagine you're this all-powerful head of the anti-corruption agency of some nation, with the full back. Everything is set up for you to succeed. You have the full backing of the politicians from both parties. They really love you. You've got all the budget you want. You've got incredible people in your organization. Somehow, this never happened, but let's just set everything up right in the exact perfect way. You've got a lot of resources, a lot of people in your group. They're all set up. They're really committed to their career in anti-corruption. That you've got unions, pension plans, the whole thing. And you got a long string of successes, like weeding out various types of corruption, et cetera. And one day, a scientist shows up in your office and says, Commander, I don't know what the title would be, says, I've got this plan that we can implement. I think in the written form, it's like this button you can press, but it's not really about magic. It's like, we've got this one, weird trick, this plan that if we implement it, corruption will be eliminated fully for everybody, forever in our country. Now, it's really interesting that if, and let's just say that the person sees this, they kind of read through the plan, like, this is going to work, right? They're convinced that this is actually efficacious. The question is, do they actually press the button? Do they actually put it in operation? Knowing that at that very moment, their whole agency and all of their incredible people and all the pension plans and everything else is going out the window. Because essentially what happens when you set up an organization is you have this implication of permanence, right? You assume that this problem will be there forever. That's a core assumption of hiring people and building up their careers and building up, and you get your promotions, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody's trying to get themselves out of a job, right? You actually hear this a lot in organizations that are like really like settled. You hear this a lot. It's like, what, are you gonna like get us out of a job? Like, slow down. But even if, again, everything is sterling, like, they know that the moment they say, okay, let's do this thing, their whole reason for being goes away. Or even let's say the budget is housed, right? Like that's still quite bad. So not only should, like, you would think, right, like that they would actively be looking for this. So let's say I have an idea for anti-corruption, or you have an idea, and you go to your friend who's like a member of parliament, or some high-ranking politician. You're like, oh, I got the plan. Or like, go to the anti-corruption people. They'd love to see this, right? Like everybody directs ideas in that space to those people. But as we discussed internally, there is a lot of pressure to have a plan, but the plan is like a 20-year plan, right? And then you start to get into this weird thing. Like, let's say nobody hears you and you go to social media and you're like, I've got the plan and we've got to, advocate for this plan. And like, bottom up sort of, it gets traction. Now you are pressured internally from your organization to stand out and say, hey, your pseudoscientific blah, blah, blah opinions are getting in the way of the hard work we have to do here at the anti-corruption agency. We have our 20-year plan, and we can't hear all these like snake oil salespeople on social media. In fact, we got to censor them, right? So all of you can sort of see it, and all of the incentives are for you, even if you come from the best place, just a little bit of self-perception. Like that's all you need, and we all have a little bit of that, right? If things are set up that way, you will be forced to do that thing. And just the cherry on top, if you don't, you'll be fired. The next guy will come in who will.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like, this is all fairly intuitive in terms of what the problem is. And it comes from something very fundamental that we all are intimately familiar with, which is, as you said, no one wants to be out of a job. Not only do you want to not be out of a job, most people don't want to just maintain their job. They want to move up the ranks somehow. So There's this built-in assumption of permanence, just sort of baked into everyone's natural tendency for how they want to behave inside of any organization. So how on earth do you get around this problem?
Right. So to me, and this comes actually, interestingly enough, comes back to what we were talking about Amazon right before. To me, specialization is the real enemy, right? Because when you are married to a specific problem, you are married to its maintenance, right? You actually kind of, sort of, maybe you won't say it, but you want it to continue. So, or at least you act as it, right? That's all that matters. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be like conscious, but like your actions are such that you will keep the problem in check, maybe, but you will not actively, desperately look for ways to eliminate it. So the solution to me is to stop at a certain level of specialization where you are still quite a generalist. So what you described at Amazon, everybody is a service builder. I think at Amazon they have that either unit is called a service, or Balena we call it a product, but it's roughly the same idea. Like you are an expert product builder. When you succeed is when you've brought this problem to a steady state where it's self-managed, right? All the loops are operating, it's in homeostasis, I guess, from biology. Everything is actually like self-managing. You can move on to your next problem. Your career is not tied to you being needed in that problem. In fact, that's a bad thing. Right? You constantly are getting pulled in to solve this problem. Maybe you're not doing it very well.
I love how you brought in homeostasis there. So the idea is, the job description is not, build the blank product. It's to build products which it's to build products that reach some kind of homeostatic equilibrium, such that they're self-managing to as much to the highest extent possible. And that you're saying that solves this problem because it gets around the curse of specialization. Instead of being focused on building, the blank product to do blank, you're now just focused on building products that become self-sustaining. And at the point that one does, you can move on to doing a different product for a different problem.
So solving the problem should be success, right? Obvious.
Mm-hmm.
You're succeeding at eliminating an issue. And sometimes it could just be something, you might not need a mistake, right? You might just realize that if we just call something different, sometimes it just goes away. Sometimes we've had some obvious realizations that there's something out there to just use and stop working on this massive project we were working on. That realization should be encouraged. Like, it should be rewarded. It shouldn't be like, oh, well, you've got a job now. So that's how I can't say we're there yet at Balena, but like, this is where we're trying to get to, where think of it more like a dojo, or like, people who are excited about the craft of building, creating these stable patterns, who are mentoring each other, right? Instead of supervising, right, we're mentoring. We are learning from each other. We want to get better at what we do. And that's a whole different way of interacting than, the Prussian army system that we were discussing at the beginning.
So I think I read something in this essay where, you were describing some of the structure of your organization, and you had something in there about like separate mission statements for different parts of the company. And that struck me as very interesting, because most companies have sort of one, they might have like multiple, company values or whatever, but there's usually one overarching mission statement that everyone is meant to organize around. And it sounded like you guys do something a little bit different. So what is that? And then, I guess the related question would be, how do you think about something like company culture, generally speaking?
Yeah. So, so basically what that essay describes is that, that Balena was struggled with departments, right? Again, like, how do we focus people? And if you look in the literature, there's kind of two ways of separating a company. You can do it functionally, like, this is HR, this is marketing, this is engineering, this is manufacturing. Or you can do it by product, right? Like P&G, for instance, has, the dish soap division, and the, detergent division, and the beauty product division, and the whatever. And they individually, these are very autonomous, right? They're almost like separate companies, except for like some overarching sort of financial management and stuff like that. So both of these have problems, right? On the one, you don't get your scale benefits because each one is doing it differently. So learnings are not transferring very well. But you have the autonomy, right? On the other one, you have coherence, as in one HR policy, one marketing approach, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't have autonomy, right? When you want to get anything done, you got to get all the people together from all the different groups and talk with managers. Good night. So this is really the fundamental problem, like coherence, autonomy, right? Like, how do we build something that operate, that makes the most of what we all know, while letting everybody kind of do their thing. So what we decided to do is define this concept of a product, but internal functions would also be refactored as products. So it's kind of like a hybrid, and I think Amazon system is not too different in intent, where you're like, okay, well, if we're gonna have to make tools for our team, we're not just gonna make tools for our team. We're gonna make what we call People OS. It's like another little product we're working on. And in there's gonna be more products, like how we schedule support. We use like combinatorial algorithms to sort of find the perfect support schedule, because we have people all over the world. We have all sorts of different things we've built. And again, the idea is that it's a product. It could be that it has one customer today, but we always say, like, tomorrow we could open this up. There should be a landing page that you can go and sign up and use it for your company. And that, I think, gets people out of the mindset of building things in this sort of hairball kind of way, right? Like in this way where all the causal arrows are just kind of intermixed. You don't know where something starts, something begins, what role something plays. You're like, okay, we have to build a proper, if you If we're going to have an interface, we're going to have a proper interface, right? If we're not going to have an interface, fine, let's all work together. But to the degree that we're going to have one, it's going to be a decent interface so that we kind of know on both sides of that what the expectations are. And I think that's where the separate mission statements come in, because you want to set those individual mission statements of the individual loops to be such that when they add up, you do the thing that you ultimately want to accomplish as a company. But you don't want somebody who's working on, tooling for our team to be thinking about edge computing, it's just not going to be very motivating for them, right? If they think that the only thing that matters at Balena is edge computing, and they're working on, scheduling algorithms for support shifts, that's not as sort of doesn't feel like you're making as big a contribution as if your mindset is, I'm working on making teams more efficient in general, and my first customer is Balena. I think that context shift helps a lot. And again, it gives you that sort of product builder mindset rather than, I don't know, like second class citizen, like internal tooling, whatever.
I see. I think that's interesting. So the reason you would have different mission statements is fundamentally because it allows you to keep everyone at a similar level of motivation. Because if you have that sort of one client-facing mission statement, as you said, you're going to have a bunch of people that don't really work on the client-facing side stuff directly, feeling like they're not actually contributing to the whole.
Yeah.
So this is going to reiterate a lot of what you've been talking about, but I pulled out this quote from your essay, and I don't remember if this is from you or you were quoting someone else, but it said, large organizations of all kinds, from corporations to governments, lose their resilience simply because the feedback mechanisms by which they sense and respond to their environment have to travel through too many layers of distortion and delay. So again, this concept of there are sensors, there are feedback loops linking these things together, and you lose resilience when this breaks down, which is often simply by putting in too many layers in between all the different nodes. And right, naturally, as a company grows, you put more and more layers and more hierarchy into the organization. And what's interesting about this to me is, as far as I know, you don't really have a background in biology, but this very much, a lot of this stuff very much reminds me of biology. When an organism breaks down, it's for the same kinds of reasons. Either the sensors stop working or the feedback loops that help regulate and coordinate them break down. And I'm wondering, I don't even know how to ask this question quite, but like, do you think of your organization almost like an organism that's growing and evolving? Is it something that's sort of like you're cultivating like a garden, or is it something that you're engineering like a device?
Look, my intent, like the dream scenario here, is where as we do better and better at what we do, I'm less and less relevant. Right? That I've handed over autonomy to more and more people on the team while we don't lose our coherence. That's the plan. So I guess it does look like engineering in the early stages, but once we hit, because we don't have enough time to wait for evolution to make the first self-replicator by chance, right? We have to get there by design. But the idea is to make it so that it can then grow organically and experience sort of evolution, can have experimentation. Even this process I just described is kind of like mitosis, right? Like we have like this one big hairball, and then you're creating like smaller clusters that look like the whole, but in a smaller way, and maybe they themselves will later trigger the same procedure. So I'm very inspired by biology. In fact, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but predictive coding I've seen in sort of in from neurosciences has very similar things about nested feedback loops as a way of explaining how the brain works. Again, I'm completely out of my depth with that stuff, but I read it and I get sort of ideas. And I think it's the reason why you're seeing these analogs is because these are deeper patterns, right? Like these are just on a systems level. It's systems all the way down anyway, no matter what you do. And I think it's kind of like with mathematics, with category theory. It's like this universal way of modeling all the other modes of science, of mathematics, right? So through category theory, you can pass through, I don't know, from topology and end up in algebra or whatever, because it's like supposed to be the pattern of patterns, right? So I think it's I check across different fields when some of these ideas start to play, and that's my way of confirming that I've not lost the plot, right? Like it's kind of a way of performing consilience on the higher level of like, do these other fields, which we can even see as sensors, have they seen the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If these ideas occur, from economics to biology to finance or I don't know, there's all sorts of engineering, like even like mechanical and physical things. You see the same patterns emerge. You're like, okay, this is a thing, right? I've hit on a real pattern.
So one thing that I think is interesting to think about is, you could almost think of, an entire nation state as, a really big startup or a really big company or something. And of course, it's going to have its own internal structure. It's going to vary from country to country. And I think you have to start thinking about some of the same things that one would think about if you were growing a startup like you are. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how internal structure within an organization either does or does not lead to a breakdown in coherence, in the organization actually achieving what it's supposed to be able to achieve, and to do that by responding as quickly and effectively as possible to what it's sensing, both in its external environment and its internal environment, just like an organism. So with that in mind, COVID for a lot of people has been just an interesting experiment in many ways. And one of the things that we're all watching happen in more or less real time is very large organizations, government institutions, for example, and how they're behaving and responding and adapting to something that's, evolving on a day-to-day basis, which is, just everything to do with the pandemic and the virus. And, there's lots of different viewpoints on this, but there's also, I think, a lot of agreement that we certainly haven't probably responded to things in the best way possible. And of course, one way to look at this is perhaps that has to do with the internal structure of the institutions that are meant to be responding to everything. So for example, the Center for Disease Control, it's been 2 years and we still don't have this thing under control. And I'm just wondering, as sort of this systems thinker and the startup guy who's thought a lot about organizational structure, what's been your view for the last 2 years on how, say, the CDC has been handling things in the US? And how is that view? Do you have any thoughts on how that might be tied to the organizational structure of that institution or one like it?
Oh, for sure. Boy, do I have thoughts. So one very interesting thing, it's a very good example because of the CDC, because it's actually got a dual mission. Right, it's both the kind of the data scientists here, it's both the people in control of the data, but they're also advocates for vaccination. Right, so their mission is like both to encourage a certain thing and to tell us what's happening. Can you see where perhaps this could lead to certain distortions? And that's why you see like these horribly contorted studies coming out about like how, well, if you look at like these 3 people in Kentucky, in the summer of 2020, like a specific day, like natural immunity is 5 times worse than vaccination, which is very, very impossible. Like just on the background, like it's like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and what they're bringing up is like something that looks like like gerrymandered, right? Like and like you have 100 studies on the one side that say one thing, and the CDC is like publishing in like and not a journal, like their internal communications, like something.
Let's just can you just very sort of clearly state for people what you're talking about specifically in this case?
Yeah, so there is one of the big disputes in terms of the pandemic, and sort of the CDC is on one side of that, is to say that immunity acquired through infection, right? Like what is called natural immunity, and people object to that term, and I get why they object to it, but it's the easiest term we've got. That immunity is it better or worse than vaccine derived immunity, right? So if you get vaccinated or if you get infected, like you have 2 people, right? One is vaccinated, was infected.
Which one's better at training your immune system?
Which one's better off for the future, like in the next time they come in contact with the virus? And there's a very, very large body of literature, a lot of data coming out of Israel, like studies that cover millions of people, that very clearly state, natural immunity is just quite robust and long lasting and just really, really solid. And vaccine immunity is what it is, right? I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It is, but it's not the same thing as national immunity. It's becoming quite clear. There's numbers we can throw out there. I don't know that it's worth getting into specifics. The point is that there's one body in the world that's like respected and putting out studies that say the exact opposite, and that's the CDC, which weirdly has this conflict in its mission of telling us what's going on, but also encouraging vaccination. So you can sort of put two and two together and say, like, okay, maybe they're not telling us, everything. Maybe they're trying to steer, they're giving us a noble lie to kind of steer the public, maybe coming from a good place, steer the public towards what they think is the better behavior. Maybe they're worried, for instance, that people, if they believe that, they would try to go out and get infected. And they don't want that to happen. So they're trying to sort of distort the information field.
And there was, I mean, I think it's quite clear that this does happen. And it's, I would say it's not obviously right or wrong. Well, I think that's up to the individual to decide. But remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were told initially, don't buy masks because they're not going to help you. And, they knew that wasn't probably accurate, but the reason they said that, it was like a noble lie, right? We wanted to preserve supplies for healthcare workers, which is, a perfectly reasonable thought to have. But it meant that the people reporting sort of what's true were telling us something that wasn't actually true, because they were also the people reporting what to do.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what you're saying. That conflict sort of puts you in the situation where you get to this, the situation where you're being told a noble lie, something that's not actually true.
Yep. Exactly. They're incentivized basically to do that. To the degree that they do or they don't is, it's hard to know without discovery, without seeing internal emails. But it definitely seems like that. And the fact that they have this mission is ambiguous, to say the least, is definitely like makes you predict that that's what would happen. It's not surprising. So that's one kind of thing that definitely happens. And that has to do with lack of clarity of mission. But then once you also see, let's say, the head of the CDC in the news saying certain things, that's so on our board is a former CTO of Microsoft. And he told me the best way I have of communicating to the rank and file at Microsoft is to talk to the press, right? They don't read the memos. They'll hear it when I talk to the press. So, when the head of the CDC goes on the mass media and says certain things, and knowing that there's like a little bit of a noble lie, potentially culture internally, you might be, led to understand as a rank and file, CDC data analyst that that's what we're looking for, right? And your boss might or might not say that explicitly, and their boss might or might not say that explicitly. But people also gather from the Gestalt, right? Like who gets treated in what way for doing what. And before you know it, you just have an organization where I'm not saying the CDC is like that, though I do deeply suspect it. But just abstractly, you would have an organization where data becomes a tool, right? It becomes an instrumental sort of object to be used to accomplish certain objectives. Your initial mission of just tell us what's going on so we can orient becomes I'm going to tell you what I think you need to know in order to do the thing I already know you want to do, which becomes really, really troublesome when the situation keeps changing, right? Because then you get caught. People remember, right? And then you keep changing your tune. People are like, hey, what's going on? I thought you said this other thing. And what's the biggest tragedy, of course, is that you waste the one resource that is even more valuable than PPE, which is institutional trust, right? And that kind of gets us to where we are today.
So, previously when we were talking about, little startups disrupting the big incumbents, it's this story that you hear so many times about, the little organization that can move fast versus the big organization that has resources and can have this long-term vision, but they're just sort of sluggish and slow to adapt. So it's like this long-standing issue that we see over and over again. It's very hard to overcome this. The story of your company is really, you were telling us a story of how you're trying to sort of overcome that tension, but there's no obvious quick solution. So, for something at the societal level like this, when you're talking about an organization like the CDC or anything at that level, and you're talking about a problem that, it's not just countrywide, it's globally, you need to have organizations that are as big and resourceful as governments. But at the same time, because the virus is mutating so quickly and things are changing so rapidly, you want to have that nimbleness. Is there just kind of like this hopeless trade-off here, or is there actually a way you can have an organization the size of a government institution respond with the nimbleness that we actually need it to?
Yeah, I mean, there's solutions on different timescales, right? Like if you told me, what do you do tomorrow, versus where would you like to be in 10 years, there's different ways to approach this. But I think the immediate thing is that just encourage feedback loops of information as much as possible, right? So for instance, there is this very disturbing trend of disempowering the doctors, or the nurses, or the people who are face to face with the patients. Right, they are being told how to do what they need to do and exactly what to do and what not to do. Their licenses are being threatened if they prescribe certain drugs. To give you a non-ivermectin example, Paul Marik, who is the one of the founders of the Frontline COVID Care Alliance, has been banned by his hospital, and they're now in a lawsuit. And I think he's been put on administrative leave for the same reason, from prescribing certain drugs to his patients in the ER that he runs. He's the head of the, the ICU, right? He's the director of the ICU, and he's being told you cannot prescribe these drugs. And these drugs include fluvoxamine, which has fantastic sort of RCTs. The people who doubt, let's say, something like ivermectin, do not doubt fluvoxamine. It's actually like pretty well understood that it's either neutral or it helps. But he's being banned from prescribing it because top down, right? And I dug into the regulations a little bit. There might be some motivations in terms of how it goes even higher up, like how the hospitals are being driven through various bonuses to prescribe certain drugs by whoever is handling the funding. I don't know if it's the NIH or the FDA or the CDC, but somewhere from the higher levels of the government, their incentive structure is in such a way that they really don't want people to be using generics. And you get this thing where you disempower the leaves of your tree, right? You disempower the people who are face to face with trying stuff, just to figure things out. This is how medicine has traditionally worked. The doctors are free to prescribe off label, right? And then things bubble up. Now we have the inverse, and especially in emergencies, this tends to happen a lot in these organizations, right? Where they just make these like tight groups because they need to make decisions fast, right? And they impose top down, but that can't continue for a long time. And that's what we're seeing. So we're seeing the opposite, basically, what we would need, which to me is like actually open up and allow the bottom up to attack certain things, because we don't have a lot of certainty around this virus. Like we just don't know a ton, but we behave like we know everything, right? So that's kind of a lack of humility that you can discuss it in like a character trait, but really comes out of the incentive structure.
Yeah, and I think those two things are tied together very closely. This reliance on top-down authority as opposed to listening what's coming up from the bottom up, in this case from like doctors on the ground treating patients, and this conflict that you identified in the CDC. But I mean, this exists everywhere. I see it in my own startup life between those meant to be reporting to everyone like what reality is versus those that are meant to direct resources based on that information as to what we should be doing. And just, I mean, this is a pervasive problem, and it results, as you mentioned earlier, in people using data as sort of a tool for whatever ends they're after. So like in a startup, just to give you some abstract examples to those listening, I see this all the time in the startups that I'm involved with. So there's some internal group, they're doing product design and engineering work. They've got their metrics that they want to hit. They've got their thing that they want to accomplish. And what you often see is if that team that has to hit those metrics and build the thing is also the team that's meant to be sort of collecting the data to support what they're doing, then what you naturally get is they just fish around for whatever data makes them look like they're doing the best. So
surprise.
I love this as a very general principle for organizing people, whether it's a government organization, a startup, your own life in many ways. The separation of church and state between, how are you collecting data to define like what's actually out in the world, and then separately, how are you deciding what to do based on that? If you have the people making the second decision, the same people as the ones like collecting and finding the data, then you just get into the self-serving forever loop, and it breaks down eventually.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, this is in the rationalist community, they have two different words for this. You have instrumental rationality, which is what do, right? What do we do? Like, how do we solve a certain problem? And you have epistemic rationality, which is what's true. And these are two different disciplines because, deception, for instance, plays very differently in these two fields. So I definitely have developed this intuition throughout the pandemic that we may apply sort of consequentialist logics to what we do, but we absolutely must be religious, like deontic, sort of, thou shalt not, about information, about what is true, and sharing that, because we don't really know. And by assuming that we know, and therefore starting to distort each other's reality, picture of reality, we are almost certainly making things worse. Like, we should assume we're making things worse by doing that, even if there's some short-term gain in somebody's metric or something. It's the losses are, we're burning down trillions to gain millions or something.
Mm-hmm. So, we've talked a lot about, obviously, organizations, literal organizations in our conversation. Your startup and startups generally, bigger organizations like we were just discussing. But a lot of this information I think is also useful to people, which is going to be the majority of people who aren't interested in starting their own company or building some big organization or something like that. So I'm wondering if you could sort of comment on, as a systems thinker, as someone who's thought about organizations and things like this, how has your thinking style, how have the strategies you've taken for your own like personal prevention strategies for things like COVID changed over the course of the last 2 years? Like what are the things that you've learned that have caused you to either start doing or stop doing different things? What has your approach been?
So I think one very interesting feature of this virus is variants, right? Like which were sort of controversial early on. Is it going to mutate around certain measures that we're taking, et cetera, et cetera? There's going to be immune escape and whatnot, and that seems to be happening. Mm-hmm. So my mind has been going towards what can we do that is so broad spectrum that it doesn't matter what the virus is doing. In fact, how can we attack the problem at its root, right? So we have so many respiratory viruses actually, right? Now that we think about it, there's the flu, there's norovirus, there's RSV, there's, COVID now, new sort of kid on the block. We don't even know all the, apparently, this is, again, I learned this recently, there's like 3 other coronaviruses, and we don't even know all, what we call the cold is like just a bucket.
It's actually several different viruses that just give similar symptoms, but they're not the same thing. Yeah.
So in my mind, it has been a lot like, can we do for air what we've done for water? Like, this is a phrase that like echoes in my head a lot, right? Because when we fixed our water supply, we just dealt with a lot of diseases in one fell swoop, right? We didn't need to know what they are or blah, blah. We know they come through the water, right? We fix that, right? We got good quality water. We're in a good place. But with the air somehow, this hasn't, like early in COVID, I don't know if you remember, where a lot of skiers had gone to the Alps and were coming back like deathly ill. And, if you think about it, they go into these chalets, right? Like the warm air, humid or whatever, airtight, sealed, just breathing into each other. You could not have designed a better environment to get, max viral load. So I've been thinking a lot about, there's this variable that we've not been thinking about at all. And can we get our air better in our houses, in our businesses? At Balena, we did a summit. We made sure there was we made a little device, which we might release about sort of showing it very clear in the room, like what the air quality was, so that a big belief of mine basically is an enabler, right? Like if people know, if people have information, like what's the air quality, they will do what they need to do to improve it, right? So can we get personal air quality monitors? There's a startup, they're the name of AT now, that have a little device. If people start pushing, in businesses and in public spaces where the air quality is bad, to improve that, The air is stale, right? There's UV filters as well, stuff like that. I
Yeah.
think that's stuff the government could do, right? Like they could just they're putting out mandates. Might as well
Yeah.
mandate some clean air.
I mean, it's actually quite simple when I think about it now, but it never occurred to me. So like we have, right, I can log onto the internet and see, like what the UV index or whatever is. And like anywhere I go on the planet, I mean, here in the Pacific Northwest, right, I can see what the air quality is because, if there's a big fire, like relatively nearby, but not so big that I notice it, I can still go find a number that tells me like, oh, wow, the air quality outside is like not that good. It's filled with smoke. So basically what you're saying is, could we somehow bake this into our everyday lives such that you could look at an app or something. It would tell you, is the airflow good or bad in this building? Is, there are a lot of particles in the air or not? Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, even it's just a fairly simple CO2 meter, something to tell me if the air is moving, right? You can do particles, you can go much deeper in that. But honestly, the one proxy you want is like, is the air moving, right? Like, people have been breathing in here a lot or not. If that was in our phones, like if you had a light at the corner of your phone that's like green or red, right? Like, or something in between. I think that would drive a lot of behavioral change for people, and you don't need everybody to do that. You got to have the 5% though that's going around like having their fists about clean air, and I do think you'd get a lot of improvement and a lot of drop in seasonal limits. Like I have a young child, and like they bring back whatever from their from their day activities, and I don't think that any of the preschools or daycares or whatever think about air quality basically at all.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I feel, I mean, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I feel like a lot of the tech would be there. Like, I don't think there's a fundamental reason why like phones couldn't start to have CO2 detectors that literally like make a light go on or something.
No, we just haven't thought in that direction.
Yeah, but
we haven't been aware of the that variable.
Yeah, but I do.
So, this purple air. I don't want to say we're completely unaware, but it's like it's a niche elite thing, right? Like some people know about it, but it's not like a daily concern.
Yeah, but I also think it's powerful to just alert people to the idea that if you have accurate ways of measuring reality, if you have sensors that will tell you the way things like actually are around you, and you simply provide that information, even if you do nothing else, people will organically start to experiment with strategies to alter their behavior, whether or not we're talking about SARS-CoV-2 epidemic stuff or anything else. If you just sort of display the right information, people will organically come to solutions.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think that's and that's really a big thing for me. Instead of like telling people what to do, I've found that things that work quite well are people that you enable them to do the right thing. You show them reality, and they're like, "Hey, I don't like that." Right? Like that's not good. These things tend to work quite well, but somehow, again, we are much more about a top-down position.
Yeah, I mean, this actually reminds me of something else I know that you've talked about. So you just mentioned enablement versus top-down control, and I know that you've said previously things like, there's two basic mindsets with respect to the future of humanity. One where we rely on control systems to keep things stable, and the other where we rely on enablement systems to do what life does, which is grow and grow. So can you unpack that for us and sort of explain what these two mindsets are and who embodies them?
Yeah. Okay. I can do my best. This is sort of this. It's an idea I've been playing with, and when I do that, I usually put it out there in big bold letters so that any pushback comes at me, so I can adjust. I want the feedback, right? So what if we thought of, basically the idea is like, what if we thought about good versus evil as enablement versus control? So there's one type of mindset, and I mean, I'm a big Elon Musk fan, so just full disclosure. But like Elon does this a lot, right? He doesn't say like you have to use electric car. He's like, here's an awesome electric car. Don't you want to have it, even if you don't care about the environment? It's like the fastest car in the world. Don't you want to have this car? And somehow that creates momentum. And now all the other car companies are, again, they are incentivized, right? Like to move. And I saw actually a tweet from the CEO of Ford saying, "Yeah, Elon, you did it. Like you've gotten us all on your frequency," which is weird, right? Like 5 years ago, nobody was being so effusive. But okay, so that's the enablement mindset is basically give people the ability to do the right thing, and they will. The control mindset is the opposite, and I think if we blow it up to large sort of scale humanity levels, we come back to sort of positive sum versus zero sum. So there's one mindset, and a lot of people would have heard of it, that there's only so many resources on the planet. There's only so much we can do. There's only so so many people that can be on the planet. We should maybe I've heard people on the slightly more extreme end saying I won't have children because the Earth can't take it or whatever, which is kind of the Malthusian philosophy, right? It goes all the way back to the 19th century. The guy who did some estimation about how in 100 years the roads will be filled with horse manure because we're getting more and more horses. Therefore, what's going to happen with the manure? Turns out we invent cars, right? But that's actually a very important dynamic, because what do humans do when we have a problem? Like, we don't just take a linear model. It's like, oops, I guess the poop is 3 floors up. We're like, we invent things, right? And that does not conform to linear models, right? We come up with step changes. So that's kind of the enablement side of give people the tools and they will find ways that you can't even imagine. So it requires you to trust humanity, trust serendipity, trust the bottom up, which is hugely psychologically uncomfortable, right? For a regulator to say somebody will come and make something. You can't tell that to Senate exactly, right? You have to be the man with a plan. And so that's the tension. A lot of the time you see with these very, very large government bureaucracies and NGOs, and there's this whole complex, right, that has this mentality of, we got to tell people what to do for their own good, and we're just going to set things up so that they do it. We're not quite at one-child policy that China had implemented, but it's things are starting to look as if people right now might not be so full-throated in condemning, that kind of policy. They're like, well, you got to do what you got to do for the Earth or whatever. But that leaves out this whole other piece, is invention, innovation, problems created, problems resolved. There is a feedback, there's a homeostasis in humanity itself, right? When something becomes uncomfortable enough attention goes to it to make it less uncomfortable. And that's my whole point, is that life is about growth, right? No species has decided to self-regulate its population and managed to do that for an extended period of time. So in my mind, it's very clear. You're either growing or you're not growing, right? And if you're not growing, you're probably dying. And so that's why, again, looking at Elon Musk, when he says, we've got to, first of all, he's going out there saying we don't have enough children, which is completely counter narrative, right? It's like, whoa, that's what the data says. Forget what the narrative says. The data actually says human population is set to decrease. But also he says, we need more planets. Let's just go out and get more land. We don't have enough land. That's arguable. I mean, but let's go terraform another planet. Oh, that's very difficult. Let's give it a shot. Let's try. Let's be open to the potential. You never know. Some people might like to do that. You might not, but some might. So this idea of just live and let live, and give others the tools to do things, and that takes our energy, and instead of directing it at each other to fight over limited goods, well, there's only so much, we can use it to enable each other to invent and to just go out there and take from the universe, the solar system and beyond. Humanity in 1,000 years, will we still be on just Earth? And if not, then why not start, going farther out already?
Well, one of the last things I want to ask you, you've mentioned a couple resources, a couple interesting books and things. If people are interested in thinking about systems and how to think about metrics and how to think about organizations, either in the abstract or if any of these resources you might point us to are specifically geared towards people interested in startups, are there any books or other resources that you want to point people to that might be related to some of the ideas we've discussed?
Yeah, so one of them is definitely this book I mentioned, The Tyranny of Metrics, which is not, it's a critique, it's not a solution, right? Which is kind of a bit of a problem, but it definitely opens your eyes to how things are today.
Who wrote that?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'll send you a message.
What kind of person?
Oh, it's like a coming from a business perspective. I think actually, it's like a some sort of business school type person. It wasn't like some sort of spiritual thing or something. It was more like here's all the examples from from finance, from health, from education, from whatever, of all these things going wrong in this predictable ways. So that's definitely a book that yeah, that comes up for me. There's this I don't know what to call him. Like he's credited with inventing lean manufacturing in Japan. Actually, there's an American called I hope I don't botch the name. W. Edwards Deming. Deming, everybody just says Deming, who actually was trying to explain things to people who are doing manufacturing in the US who didn't listen to him. So he went to Japan, and then he found a collaborator who was Japanese, and they got these ideas there. And they, lean manufacturing, Toyota production system, all that stuff now is sort of what then got re-exported back to the US. And so he came back and tried to then teach them again here. But a lot of the thinking of Deming and Russ Aikoff as well, a lot of these systems thinkers of like middle 20th century, I think, from Second World War on to the 80s, they've talked a lot about these things. Deming, I don't think, has like a definitive book. I'm sure there's a lot of books out there on him. But just looking at some quotes from Deming, and Aikoff as well, and just finding, almost anything that they've written is probably in that same vein. Just tells you what their critiques were of the ways that we run our companies, and they were pointing to ways to do things better. I think where they failed, and I feel really stupid saying that because they made just incredible gobs of progress, is in pulling it all together in a sort of coherent way, like how to run a company. But I think that's partly because that had not been, they didn't have a complete answer. And part maybe because the technology that was available then maybe did not enable a complete answer. But I guess that's what I'm trying to resolve. And if you share the link to the Substack about Balena's methods, we will continue to write in that Substack called urovoros.substack.com. We're going to continue to write things in that vein as we continue to either publish things that we're already doing or grapple with new problems we haven't gone into yet and sort of discuss that.
Yeah, I'll be sure to link to that in the episode description in the show notes. But anyways, Alex, thank you for your time. This is a really interesting conversation. I look forward to following you on the internet.
Great. Thanks for chatting.